And we are back with another video. Today, I wanted to talk about this article in Mopar Insiders that is entitled, Stellantis Faces Dealer Trust Crisis in the U.S. 72% of U.S. dealers report no trust in automaker, citing profit pressures and leadership turmoil. The thing is I'm a nerd when it comes to business. I love reading about stuff. I didn't get to go to college, didn't go to business school, but somehow I found my way into running a pretty big business in my day-to-day job. And I've learned a lot by just reading and paying attention to the rest of the business world. But the one business that has perplexed me and has also intrigued me this last 5 years or so has been Dodge, Chrysler, Jeep, Ram, and the parent company Stellantis ever since they acquired these companies. And things got really, really dumb since COVID. And in this article, I think it exposes something that I've only talked about, I believe, in maybe one video about maybe 2 years ago, where I got into this subject about how the markups and the add-ons and all the insanity that the dealers do also should rest on the shoulders of Stellantis, but not for the reasons you think. Not because, quote, Stellantis isn't doing anything about it, they should hold their dealers more responsible. No, the reason why this should fall on their shoulders as well, and probably even more, not that I'm letting any Dodge dealers or Chrysler, Jeep, Ram dealerships off the hook. I believe they have reached a level of sliminess that is downright epic proportions in this economy, in this auto industry. Yes, other dealers do crazy stuff, but to the level that the Dodge, Chrysler, Jeep, Ram dealers did it, especially through the hype of the end of the Chargers and Challengers, is something that I don't know that we've ever seen. But the reason it happened is just a small little sentence, a small little paragraph in this article that I wanted to share with you all. And I get your thoughts on it because it's going to come off like I'm defending the dealerships. And I don't know how to say this any clearer. I am not defending the dealerships. There are good ones out there and there are bad ones out there. But the good ones are just oftentimes a lower level of bad ones based on their behavior. But why did they get so crazy? Because the only car I remember ending up with an enormous markup was the 2018 Dodge Demon. That one I remember getting marked up. But the rest of the universe we were in prior to COVID, prior to the chip shortage, was a pretty normal market where you would go in and see a Hellcat for $70,000 and you'd get power dollars for $7,000 off of that Hellcat. I got almost $7,970 off of my Red Eye when I bought it originally, and the dealers even negotiated beyond that to make a deal with you, and you would roll around in the dirt for 6 hours and you would leave feeling like you got a deal. But then things got stupid. COVID happened, chip shortage happened, and the market changed. But was it the chip shortage that drove it? Well, no, because after inventory levels recovered and got back to normal, the dealers were still doing it. To this day, in a down car market, the dealers are still doing it. But why? Well, let me just start off with this. I met an owner of a Dodge dealership at a car event once, and he definitely brought up his dissatisfaction with my videos where I was beating up on the Dodge dealerships and the markups and the add-ons and everything. And he is an owner that I had called before and asked, would you sell me the car at MSRP? And he said, no, I can't. You got to pay to play nowadays. And this was probably in the middle of 2021 or so. And I get it. That was the world California was in. But I was able, many of you followed when I did this, I was able to simply fly to St. Louis and buy one and drive it back. And then I did it again the next year and again the next year and not pay any markup whatsoever or any add-ons. But in California and many other places in America, they were marking them up. But you know what this guy showed me? He pulled his phone out and he said, let me show you something. What's happening in like 2021, 2022, because we know that prices went up almost 50%. If you go back to like 2020 to today, it was like they raised the prices by almost 50%. And we were all supposed to just tolerate it. It's like putting the frog in the boiling water, but when the water's cold, frog was cool. He's swimming around doing the backstroke, and you slowly turn the heat up, and before you know it, you got a boiled frog, and he never jumped out. Well, that's kind of what happened with us. They kept turning up the heat and raising the price a little bit more, but then the dealers started adding on massive with markups and add-ons. But I asked this guy, why does that happen? Why do you do this? You know, I know you're mad at me about my videos. Why do you do this? And he pulled out his phone and showed me the cost that he had to pay for those cars. His invoice, his cost for those cars. After everything, after any back-end money, any other money that came to him, he said, Brad, the problem is if I don't charge markups, I can't make any money. I'm going to make, with the cost to run my dealership and the less cars to sell, I'm screwed if I don't. And some dealers can afford to do it. I simply cannot. And I consider that to be a cop-out and kind of called BS. And I think in one of my videos, I told the story and I was just like, yeah, well, I still don't support it. But what happened, according to him, and since then I've spoken to quite a few other dealer owners and GMs who have shared this with me as well, that what happened is Stellantis, while they were raising MSRP prices, they were also shrinking the profit down, the cost, the money a dealer could make between what MSRP was and what it cost them to buy the cars. And part of that, I've heard, was that Stellantis knew they had lost control of the dealers when it came to markups. So the dealers were making all their profit off the customer on markups. So they didn't need as much profit in between. And like any large auto manufacturer or large corporation, whittling down expenses, raising prices to increase profit is just what they do. It reminds me of the story of the soup salesman, the soup shop that had been in business for 40 years. And the man was finally at retirement age. And he said, you know what, I'm going to sell my soup shop. There's a line around the building every single day to get his soup. His prices were fair and his soup was outstanding. But this new very large corporation bought the soup shop. And then it ran perfectly, continued on, they made no changes. But then budget season came up and a finance guy got a hold of the P&Ls and said, listen, what do we got to do to improve the profits? Because the profits, while great, could always be better, what the big corporations think. Well, one guy rose his hand and said, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we replace some of the soup broth with like 5% water? No one will notice and we'll spend less money on the soup. And they did that. In the next quarter, profits went higher. They sold the same amount of soup. The lines were still around the building. So then they had another meeting and said, well, anybody have any other ideas? What else could we do? And that same guy said, hey, let's raise it to 10%. 10% water. And then they got some complaints. What's changed? What happened? So they lost some business. They had a little bit less customers. But they said it's still good because we're making more money now, so it's not affecting our bottom line, and we're still making a little bit more. Next quarter comes along, and finally says double it. Go to 20% water in the soup broth. And at that point, the customer's cut in half. The complaints go through the ceiling, but they have to make half the soup they ever had to make, so they were able to lay off one of their cooks and one of their cashiers. So then the P&L stayed the same because they cut their expenses. They got less expenses selling half the soup, but they got half the expenses, so they continued to cruise along. The next quarter comes along. Guy has the same idea. Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we add some more water? And pretty soon, there's no customers. They've laid off the employees, and they end up shutting the business down. Well, that's kind of what happens in a lot of big companies out there. And what has happened with Stellantis is they kept cutting like crazy, but then they started raising the cost to the dealerships, pushing the dealerships to do what they were already doing just to survive. I'm not supporting them, but just to survive, especially big dealerships with large inventory, large staffing, and large expense structures in very expensive places like California or Florida or other places where having a large dealership costs a lot of money, and salaries and minimum wages and everything else were higher. So what they ended up doing is picking a fight with their dealers, which in this article, I will just scroll past all the stuff we already know, which is the results highlighted a rocky relationship and its dealer network, which is strained cost-cutting measures, pricing strategies, and product decisions. All right, right here. The source, I'll just blow this up a little bit. The source of dealer discontent seems to lie in Stellantis' approach to profitability. Dealers accuse the automaker of attempting to capture a larger share of pandemic-era profit margins by raising vehicle prices and implementing cost-cutting strategies. While these measures may have made sense for global operations, they left U.S. dealers feeling sidelined and undervalued. So let me just translate all of this over to what we all experienced is they cut quality, they cut expenses, raised prices on the dealers, raised prices of MSRP, whittled the margin down, and then pushed the dealers to a place to where they're charging all this other stuff to try and make up for the less amount of money that they're getting. And then they didn't give them any cars. So it's no surprise that we hate the dealers. The dealers hates Stellantis. Stellantis hates the dealers and the customers. And everybody declared war on each other. And nobody knows where this is going to end. I can tell you the solution. The solution is going to be if you let the dealers make enough money and the dealers will abide by a rule of don't mark up our cars and then set some prices where people can afford them again, get them out of this trying to compete with luxury brands pricing, you will see a fixing of the company. So they've got to fix the margins for their dealers. Otherwise, no wonder the dealers don't want any of these EVs showing up to the lots. No wonder they're not ordering these cars. No wonder there's thousands of them sitting in parking lots, but they're not getting delivered because either they have problems or dealers don't want them because the margins are too thin. And absent being able to mark them up, which they know they're not going to be able to do because, frankly, nobody wants them, they've got a huge problem. Stellantis needs to fix the margins with their dealers and then have a conversation with them about not trying to push all those costs onto us in the form of markups and add-ons and other crap, and then recognize who the customers are and stop trying to sell us Dodges or Jeeps or Rams at Mercedes-Benz and BMW prices. So I just thought as a student of business, something I would share that's maybe boring for a lot of you, but I think bottom line is Stellantis screwed up and then dealers capitalized on the markups originally while they still had a profit margin, but then Stellantis whittled that down and then it got really jammed on us and now they're stuck painted in a corner where they can't make any money unless they try to rip us off. And now Stellantis has come back with all kinds of incentives to try to make these cars affordable again. It's just a mess. And somebody with more brain cells than Carlos Tavares needs to show up and write this thing and make it simple for the customers. Stop doing stupid add-ons. End the markups on anything and everything. Charges fair prices for these cars. Allow the dealerships to have a margin that would keep them in business so they don't have to feel like they need to be slimy with us. I don't know if you can fix it because so many of them have been pre-programmed just to behave this way. But I think if the right leader gets in place as Stellantis, that's how they can fix this thing. So let me know what you think about this stuff in the comments below. And I'm sure some of you say, you're letting the dealers off the hook. Never. That would never happen. See you all in the next one. Bye-bye.